Millions of years ago, the world was an unforgiving place. Vast landscapes stretched endlessly, dense forests with towering ferns, swamps thick with mist, and open plains where only the toughest survived. The air was heavy, humid, charged with the scent of earth and decay. Massive creatures roamed, some slow and lumbering, others swift and deadly. The sun rose and set without mercy, marking time for a relentless struggle. Life was raw and immediate. Survival demanded constant vigilance. The ground was uneven, littered with sharp stones and fallen branches. Water sources were scarce and fiercely guarded. Every shadow could hide a predator, every rustle a threat. Bodies were lean, muscles taut beneath skin weathered by the elements. Hair tangled and matted, coated with dust and sweat. Faces marked by the harshness of the environment, eyes sharp, always alert. Tools were crude but vital, rough flakes of stone chipped carefully to create cutting edges, bones shaped into piercing points, wood stripped and sharpened for hunting or defense. Clothing was scarce, fashioned from raw hides and fibers, protecting against cold nights and biting insects. Fire was a precious discovery, a fragile shield against darkness and danger. But even in this brutal world, life endured and adapted. Creatures evolved powerful claws, keen senses, and cunning strategies. Some hunted in packs, others relied on camouflage or speed. The fight was not only for food but for territory, for shelter, for the chance to pass on genes to the next generation. Amidst this chaos, early beings learned to read the signs of nature, the shift in wind patterns, the tracks left by prey, the sounds of distant calls. They moved silently, blending into the landscape, becoming part of the endless cycle of life and death. Yet, beneath this harsh reality, there was a spark, a growing intelligence that would change everything. The story of survival was not just about strength, but about innovation, cooperation, and resilience. It was the beginning of a journey that would shape the future of life on Earth. What secrets did this primeval world hold? What lessons were carved into stone and bone by those who lived through it? The answers lie buried deep in time, waiting to be uncovered. This is the story of life a million years ago, the harsh realities, and the relentless fight to survive. The morning mist clung to the low-lying ferns as movement stirred beneath the canopy. Thin limbs pushed through dense underbrush, searching for signs of water and food. The ground was soft, saturated from recent rains, imprinting every step with delicate tracks that told stories of those who passed before. Eyes scanned the horizon, alert to the slightest change, the snap of a twig, the shimmer of feathers, the faint scent carried on the breeze. Survival depended on reading these subtle clues. A cracked branch nearby told of a heavy creature's passage, perhaps a herbivore grazing cautiously. The scent of damp earth mixed with decaying leaves hinted at a recent kill, a potential source of nourishment for scavengers waiting in the shadows. Hands, calloused and stained with dirt, reached out to gather edible roots and tough-skinned fruits, carefully avoiding poisonous varieties. Movement was deliberate, silent, conserving energy while remaining ready to react. The sun climbed higher, burning away the fog and revealing the vast expanse of the wilderness. Suddenly, a distant roar shattered the quiet, a reminder of the ever-present danger lurking beyond the thicket. Muscles tensed. The group shifted position, blending with the environment. Sharp stones were gripped tightly, weapons carved from bone and wood at the ready. The fight for survival was never far. Nearby, a shallow stream offered fresh water, but its banks were marked with the footprints of large predators. The choice was clear: risk exposure or endure thirst. The decision would mean the difference between life and death. As the day wore on, the landscape transformed. Open plains replaced dense forests, and the heat intensified. Shadows grew shorter, and the constant hum of insects filled the air. Signs of recent fires scarred the earth, forcing creatures to migrate and adapt. The struggle to find shelter became as urgent as the hunt for food. Every step forward was a challenge, every breath a victory. Yet, through these trials, early beings honed their instincts and sharpened their tools. The land was unforgiving, but it was also a classroom, teaching resilience, observation, and patience. Hidden dangers awaited at every turn, but so did opportunities, new territories to claim, resources to exploit, and alliances to forge. What lay beyond the next ridge? How would the creatures of this ancient world respond to the shifting balance of power? The answers would reveal the next chapter in the relentless fight to survive. And just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, a sudden tremor rippled through the earth, signaling a change unlike any before. The tremor faded, but its impact lingered. The ground beneath shifted subtly, unsettling loose stones and dry soil. Trees creaked, their roots trembling as if warning of unseen dangers. The air grew heavy with tension. Movement slowed, senses sharpened. The once familiar terrain now seemed unpredictable, a fragile stage where survival hung by a thread. The group pressed forward cautiously, navigating uneven ground scarred by the quake. Cracks in the earth formed shallow trenches, making footing treacherous. A single misstep could mean injury or worse. The sky darkened as thick clouds gathered, casting a looming shadow over the landscape. Rain threatened to fall, promising relief from heat, but also complicating the search for shelter and food. Visibility shrank, sounds muffled beneath the growing storm. The scent of damp earth mingled with a sharper, metallic tang, signs that something had changed in the ecosystem. Tracks appeared in the softened mud, large paw prints, fresh and unmistakable. Predators had sensed opportunity in the disturbance, drawn toward weakened prey and unsettled territories. The group's pace quickened, urgency replacing cautious observation. Stone tools, once reliable, showed their limits. A sharp-edged flake broke during an attempt to cut through tough hide, leaving hands exposed and vulnerable. Improvisation became essential. Bones were sharpened anew, wood splintered and reshaped, but time was running thin. Hunger gnawed relentlessly, patience frayed beneath a pressing threat. Suddenly, a guttural growl echoed through the trees, a warning, a challenge, a promise of confrontation. Eyes locked on the shadowy shapes advancing, muscles coiled, breath held. The fight was inevitable. The terrain offered little advantage. Exposed ground with sparse cover, the storm beginning to pour, turning the earth beneath into slippery clay. The clash would test every ounce of strength, skill, and instinct. Failure meant death. Success meant survival, at least for a little longer. As the first raindrops fell, mingling with sweat and blood, the struggle unfolded in raw, brutal reality. In this ancient world, every day was a battle against the elements, the predators, and the limits of one's own endurance. Yet amidst chaos, the spark of adaptation glimmered, learning from failure, honing tools, reading the land anew. The storm was not just a threat, it was a catalyst for change. What new challenges would tomorrow bring? How would those who lived 1,000,000 years ago continue to fight against an ever-shifting world? The answers lay just beyond the rain's relentless beat. The storm's fury intensified, rain hammering down in relentless sheets, turning the uneven ground into a slick, treacherous battlefield. Visibility was reduced to shadows and fleeting shapes, sounds distorted by the roar of thunder. The clash with the predators became a desperate dance of survival, quick strikes, evasive movements, and the raw grit of endurance. The sharp-boned spear was thrust and parried, but exhaustion set in fast. Muscles burned, breath came in ragged gasps, and the cold water soaked through every layer of worn hide and bark fiber clothing. One misstep sent a foot sliding on the slick mud, nearly toppling a fragile defense. A predator seized the moment, jaws snapping shut mere inches away. A sudden, Sharp pain radiated through a forearm, an accidental gash from a fractured stone blade. Blood mixed with rain, a stark reminder of vulnerability. The injury slowed movement, forcing a painful retreat from the immediate threat. The group was scattered, their unity fractured by the chaos. The loss of a vital tool meant more than inconvenience. It threatened the very ability to fend off future dangers. Shelter was urgently needed, but the storm had wiped away easy options. Trees bent under the wind, branches snapping unpredictably. Makeshift coverings of leaves and vines were soaked through, offering little protection. Bodies huddled together, shivering from cold and adrenaline, skin slick with grime and rain. The earth itself seemed hostile, mud caked under nails, clothing torn, feet raw and bleeding from relentless travel. Hunger gnawed at empty stomachs, but the priority was survival through the night. The damage was tangible: a fractured limb, a lost spear, the fracture of trust and safety. Each sacrifice weighed heavily, a brutal cost of existence in this primeval world. Yet, amidst the hardship, there was a flicker of resolve. The need to adapt was greater than ever. New strategies would be forged from these failures, new tools crafted from broken pieces. The battle was not over. It had merely shifted, moving from open conflict to the unforgiving test of endurance. As the storm began to wane, clouds parting to reveal a pale dawn, the consequences of the night's struggle became clear. Injuries demanded care, resources were scarce, and the predators remained near, waiting for weakness. The coming hours would decide whether survival was possible or if this chapter would end here, in the cold mud and rain. What choices lay ahead? How would the fragile group rebuild strength and face the danger still lurking beyond the breaking light? The next step would reveal the true cost of life 1,000,000 years ago, and the price paid for every breath taken. As dawn broke, pale and fragile against the retreating storm, the battered group faced a critical choice. The injured limb throbbed with growing intensity, a stark reminder of vulnerability. The fractured spear lay useless among the mud and scattered debris. Hunger pressed harder, but the immediate threat was survival itself. Eyes scanned the horizon, searching for shelter, safety, and sustenance. Then, a sudden discovery changed everything: a faint plume of smoke rising beyond a distant ridge. It was thin, almost imperceptible against the pale sky, but unmistakable. Fire. A source of warmth, protection, and a beacon of life in a harsh, unforgiving world. The presence of fire meant others were near, either a rival group or a predator drawn by the same needs. Approaching it was a risk, but staying exposed in the open offered little hope. The decision was made to move toward the smoke, carefully, silently, with weapons ready and senses sharpened. Each step was measured, balancing desperation with caution. The terrain shifted again, rockier now, with sparse vegetation and jagged outcrops that could provide shelter or concealment. The group's cohesion began to reform, as necessity forced cooperation. The injured were supported, and new tools were fashioned from shards of stone and twisted with scavenged along the way. As they neared the ridge, signs grew clearer, footprints pressed into the soft earth, remnants of discarded bones, and faint echoes of distant voices carried on the wind. The fire was no accident. It was a signal of life, of a community managing the same brutal conditions, perhaps with knowledge or resources beyond what this group had known. But it could also mean conflict. The unknown stood before them, both a promise and a threat. The balance of survival now hinged on what lay beyond that ridge, whether it was salvation or destruction. The world 1,000,000 years ago was vast, wild, and unpredictable. This moment was a turning point, where the fight for existence collided with the possibility of connection, innovation, or annihilation. What awaited in the flickering glow of that distant fire? Would it bring hope or herald greater dangers? The answer would redefine the struggle to survive in this ancient landscape, setting the stage for what came next. And just as the first rays of sun pierced the horizon, a sudden shout broke the silence, an unmistakable call that changed everything. The sudden call sliced through the fragile morning calm, jolting the group into immediate alertness. Hearts pounded, breaths caught in throats. The distant fire had drawn attention. Unknown voices, wary and sharp, echoed across the ridge. Instinct demanded caution. The group huddled behind rocky outcrops, quickly assessing wounds and salvaging what tools remained intact. The broken spear was discarded, but fragments were gathered. Sharp edges could be repurposed into cutting implements or embedded into wooden shafts. Leather strips torn from worn garments became bindings, crude but effective. Bones, stripped clean by scavengers, were fashioned into points and needles. The injured were supported, their movements slow but steady. Survival depended on adaptability now more than brute strength. The shifting terrain, jagged and uneven, offered both cover and challenge. Silent signals were exchanged, eyes scanning for signs of approach. The rain had softened the earth, muffling footsteps, but also making travel slippery and uncertain. The group decided to move closer to the fire, but under the veil of dense foliage, using natural shadows to conceal their advance. Attempts to communicate were met with cautious silence. The unknown watchers remained hidden, their intentions unclear. A misstep sent a dry twig snapping, and a tense moment followed. No immediate response, but the threat lingered. Patience became a weapon. Over hours, the group observed the flickering glow from a safer distance, noting the presence of crude shelters fashioned from branches and animal hides, evidence of a settled community. This was a crucial discovery. Others had mastered fire and shelter, a significant advantage in the relentless struggle against the elements and predators. Small gains were made. A sharpened bone tool retrieved unnoticed, a patch of edible roots identified nearby, and a momentary break in the watcher's vigilance allowed for brief rest. Yet, risks remained high. The group's leader signaled a cautious retreat to reassess and plan. The need to learn, adapt, and perhaps forge alliances was clear. Survival was no longer just about individual skill or strength, but about understanding others, the environment, and the tools that could tip the balance. As the sun climbed higher, the group prepared to return under the cover of midday heat, knowing the path ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers and possibilities alike. What strategies would emerge from this encounter? How would the fragile alliance between nature, fire, and early beings evolve? The next phase of their journey would test not only their bodies, but their capacity to adapt and endure. And as the shadows lengthened, a new sound pierced the air, a rhythmic pounding, distant but deliberate, signaling that the story was far from over. With the distant rhythmic pounding echoing through the trees, the group moved with deliberate purpose, setting their plan into motion. The knowledge gained from previous cautious observation now fueled their resolve. They split into smaller teams to maximize efficiency. Some would gather fresh water from a hidden spring mapped earlier, others would collect dry wood and kindling, while a few prepared sharpened tools for potential conflict or hunting. Every movement was measured, each step considered against the treacherous terrain, slick mud underfoot, thorny underbrush, and tangled roots that threatened to betray their presence. The shifting sky bore ominous signs. Clouds gathered low, heavy with the promise of rain. This impending shift in weather forced the group to quicken their pace, balancing urgency with stealth. The threat of a sudden storm mid-exposure could be deadly, but the advantage of the temporary cover it would provide could mask their approach to the unknown encampment. Vigilance was paramount. Sentinels were posted at strategic vantage points, their eyes scanning for movement, their ears attuned to the faintest rustle or crack of a branch. The group developed a series of subtle signals, grunts, hand gestures, and the occasional tap of stone on wood to communicate silently across distances. This coordination allowed them to adjust routes dynamically, avoiding open clearings where they might be spotted. As the teens navigated the dense foliage, they marked discreet trails using broken twigs and scraped bark, ensuring a safe retreat path if needed. Approaching the encampment under the cover of dense mist, the group noticed signs of activity: footprints fresh in the mud, smoldering embers from extinguished fires, and discarded animal bones stripped clean. These details confirmed the presence of others, but also hinted at recent movement and possible vulnerability. A decision was made to utilize distraction tactics. A small fire was ignited at a distance, sending smoke curling upward to draw attention away from the main approach. Simultaneously, a hunting party moved silently to flank the encampment, ready to seize any opportunity for resources or territory. The stakes had never been higher. Success meant access to shelter, food, and potential alliance. Failure risked injury, loss of precious tools, or even death. Every decision had consequences, and the balance between caution and aggression teetered on a knife's edge. As the first drops of rain began to fall, the group pressed forward, embracing the chaos of the storm as both peril and protector. The hidden watchers stirred, alerted by disturbance and scent, preparing to defend their domain. What would unfold in this clash of survival instincts? Would the group's careful strategy overcome the entrenched resistance, or would nature's harshness claim another toll? The coming moments would define the fragile boundary between life and extinction. And just beyond the edge of the clearing, a pair of glowing eyes watched, unblinking and patient, waiting for the next move. The heavy rain blurred vision and soaked the earth, turning the forest floor into a slick, treacherous maze. The group's flanking party, moving through dense undergrowth, froze as a sudden crack echoed. An accidental snap of a branch betrayed their position. Instantly, the encampment's inhabitants stirred, their silhouettes emerging from beneath crude shelters, weapons fashioned from sharpened bones, and stone gripped tightly in calloused hands. Tension snapped like a drawn bowstring. The flanking group hesitated, weighing the risk of retreat against the chance to seize advantage in the element of surprise. The watchers' growls mingled with the relentless drumming of rain, a grim chorus underscoring the imminent clash. The group's leader made a swift decision: fall back to regroup and protect the vulnerable members tending to the fire and supplies. But the retreat was fraught with peril. One member stumbled, the sudden loss of footing sending a stone tool skittering away into the darkness. A sharp cry pierced the night, an injury inflicted by a thrown projectile or a desperate swipe from a predator defending territory. The injured were hurriedly aided, but the loss was permanent. Blood seeped into the soaked earth, marking their trail. The main group, alerted by the disruption, tightened their formation, raising crude shields of bark and interwoven branches in a defensive stance. The air was thick with fear and determination. The enemy advanced cautiously, exploiting the terrain's natural choke points, their movements honed by familiarity with the land. The group countered with quick bursts of thrown spears and sharp shouts, attempting to unsettle their foes, and by precious seconds. Each strike carried the weight of survival, every hesitation a gamble. The rain washed away tracks, but blurred the line between allies and adversaries. As exhaustion gnawed at muscles and minds, the group realized that this confrontation was more than a skirmish. It was a test of endurance, will, and adaptability. The injured needed shelter and care, yet the terrain offered little reprieve. The fragile alliance between fire and flesh wavered under relentless pressure. Yet, amid the chaos, a flicker of resolve ignited, a shared understanding that survival demanded sacrifice, innovation, and unyielding spirit. The battle's outcome remained uncertain, but the path forward was clear: fight or be consumed. Shadows shifted in the rain-soaked forest as the two forces braced for the next move. What unexpected force would tip the balance in this brutal struggle? The decisive moment loomed just beyond the storm's fury. The storm's fury reached its peak, rain lashing down in sheets, turning the forest into a chaotic blur of shadow and sound. Amid the relentless downpour, the two groups collided with fierce determination. Spears thrust and stones flew, each strike echoing primal desperation. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood mingled with damp earth, and smoke rising from scattered embers. The injured cried out, their pain fueling the group's resolve, yet dragging down their pace. A fierce struggle unfolded near a fallen tree, its massive trunk a silent witness to the battle. One member, wielding a hastily sharpened bone knife, lunged to protect a fallen comrade, but was met by a retaliatory blow that left a deep gash across the shoulder. Another, clutching a wooden spear splintered at its tip, managed to drive it between ribs, forcing an enemy to retreat with a guttural cry. The cost was steep, limbs bruised, bodies bleeding, tools broken or lost amid the frenzy. Yet, in this crucible of violence, a decisive moment emerged. The group's leader, seizing an opening, signaled a concentrated push toward the encampment's heart, where a small fire flickered weakly beneath a torn animal hide. With a synchronized effort, the group overwhelmed the defenders guarding the fire, extinguishing the flame and scattering the remaining opposition into the storm's murk. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute, punctuated only by ragged breaths and the distant rumble of thunder. The encampment, once a rival stronghold, was now theirs, but the victory was shadowed by loss. The injured lay sprawled on the wet ground, some beyond aid, their lifeblood seeping into the sodden earth. Tools scavenged from the fallen were few, and shelter was scant amid the storm-battered forest. Yet the captured fire, though diminished, was a prize beyond measure, light against darkness, warmth against cold, a fragile beacon of survival. In the wake of the confrontation, a somber reckoning took hold. The cost of survival was carved deep into flesh and spirit, but with the fire's fragile glow came a renewed hope. The group understood that this moment marked not just an end, but a beginning, an inheritance of knowledge, territory, and resilience. As the storm began to wane and the first pale light seeped through heavy clouds, the group gathered around the flickering embers, their eyes reflecting both sorrow and determination. What new challenges awaited in a world where fire was power, and survival demanded ever greater cunning? The next chapter would reveal the true price of endurance. As dawn broke, the remnants of the storm left the forest damp and heavy with mist. The group, weary and wounded, gathered around the fragile fire rekindled from smoldering embers. The flames danced weakly, yet their glow carried a profound significance, a symbol of survival, resilience, and the spark of human ingenuity. The battle had exacted a harsh toll. Some lives lost forever to the unforgiving wilderness, others marked by scars that would tell silent stories for years to come. Yet, from these sacrifices emerged a deeper understanding of cooperation, strategy, and the delicate balance between aggression and caution. The captured encampment offered more than temporary shelter. It represented a foothold in a relentless environment where resources were scarce and every advantage counted. Tools and materials gathered from the defeated opponents fueled innovation. Sharpened stones, sturdy bones, and animal hides repurposed to strengthen clothing and shelter. The preservation of fire meant warmth during cold nights, protection from predators, and a new means to cook food, improving nutrition and endurance. These developments would ripple through generations, laying foundations for social bonds and cultural evolution. The group's experience underscored the harsh realities of prehistoric life. Survival was a continuous fight, demanding adaptability, resilience, and the courage to face uncertainty. In the vast expanse of primeval forests and open plains, life was fragile, yet persistent. This chapter of struggle and triumph was a testament to the enduring spirit that shaped the course of human history, where every decision, every tool forged, and every fire tended was a step toward the future. As the group prepared to move forward, carrying the legacy of their hard-won victory, the ancient world around them remained indifferent, its cycles of life and death unfolding as they always had. But within this small circle of flickering light, something new had taken root: hope. The story of survival millions of years ago was not just about hardship, it was about the unyielding will to endure and transform. What lessons from this time continue to shape life today? The journey of discovery is far from over. Leave a like and support the continuation of this historical series.